Sneaker of the year. It's always controversial, and so of course, I'm going to give you my opinion, this time on Fire Footwear. Welcome back to Fire Footwear, everybody. As always, this is your host, Matt Frates, and I hope that this finds you well. First off, I want to say Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays to everybody who celebrates this time of year. It's been a few weeks since I've come out with some content. The month of December has been extremely busy with family stuff, with holiday stuff, and the time has just gotten away from me. But don't think for a second that I haven't missed every single one of you, and I think that your support is one of the reasons why I keep going. It's really, really amazing. And so we're going to end this year by talking about Sneaker of the Year. Now, Sneaker of the Year is one of those interesting things where I feel like every single year, sneaker culture gets together and sort of unanimously decides that we are going to agree to disagree on Sneaker of the Year. And I believe that one of the things that people forget, or one of the aspects of in lists like this, is that it's subjective. Sneaker of the Year is not objective in any way. Nobody's opinion about what is the sneaker of the year, or a top 10 list of sneakers of the year, or whatever it is better than anybody else's. In my opinion, there are no people who have an opinion that is elevated higher than mine, or yours, or the person sitting next to you, or whatever. There are people that have been in the game for a long time. There are people who have accumulated knowledge and certainly have accumulated collections, and all of that is well and good. But when it comes down to what is a sneaker of the year, it really comes down to what is your favorite sneaker of the year. And so this episode, I'm going to break down how I'm going about sneaker of the year. And just remember though, my opinion is my opinion. It doesn't matter in the long run. And when we get to the end of 2025, which we hopefully will together, we're going to have this exact same discussion again, and people are going to disagree. And that's just the way that the world works. So when I think of Sneaker of the Year, I look at the sneaker culture or sneaker economy as a whole. And I think that the sneaker market has changed so much over the last 5 years or so. The sneaker market has really expanded to include running shoes as now part of the culture. We put the culture in quotes. When I got back into it, and I think for a very, very long time, sneaker culture was mostly basketball shoes. And obviously skating shoes were in there, and there were some other sort of lifestyle models, trainers, things like that. But for the most part, sneaker culture has been basketball shoes. But starting with the resurgence of New Balance in the culture and adding on brands like Asics, I think now running shoes are firmly entrenched in the culture. And so I think when you're trying to think of a sneaker of the year, trying to pin it down to just one sneaker, in my opinion, is very, very difficult. And I think it's nearly impossible. And so when I'm going to talk about sneaker of the year, I'm breaking it out into categories. Yes, there are a certain number of categories that I'm going to break it out in that I think are applicable to how I view sneaker culture. Now, one thing I will tell you is that runners, it's very difficult for me to put them in a sneaker of the year discussion. And the reason being, a lot of it comes from my background as a marathon runner back in the day. And when I look at these Asics that are coming out, a lot of times I think to myself, I could have had these 10 years ago or 12 years ago. It doesn't mean that I don't appreciate what they are, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't like them, wear them, buy them, whatever it is. It's just that when I look at them, I have a very difficult time putting them into sneaker culture in my mind. And to me, it's just a different beast entirely. When I'm looking for running shoes or working out shoes, I separate that from looking for sneakers that are for the culture and for how I'm going to wear them with outfits and so forth. And so for the purposes of this list, I have a couple of runners on here, but I do not have it out as a category. And so the categories that I have are best Jordans, of course. I have best Nikes, best new model, best non-Nikes, and including a worst of the year. And I think that that's important because not every shoe that comes out is fire, and not every model that comes out is fire. So let's start with the best Jordans. Now, I think that Air Jordan had a really good year this year. Certainly, we have been critical of quality issues a la the Black Cement 3s, but I think for the most part, a lot of the shoes that came out were really, really nice. And some of the ones that I think are worth mentioning were the Dusted Clay Jordan 1 Highs. That was a women's release. I thought those were fantastic. The quality of those was wonderful. The color palette was just different than we normally see, and I think that that stood out to me. The Military 4s, a great retro. One of the few cops that I made this year. Absolutely fantastic. Just, it's really nostalgic. I love that shoe, and I thought it was very well done. The reimagined black and red 4s, a lot of people felt a way about those, but I think that the leather was amazing. That was another cop of mine, amazing. The Mocha Jordan 1 Low OG, anytime you get a Jordan 1 Low OG cut, you're going to be in good shape. The first in-flight Jordan 1 High, another women's release, I believe. You really can't go wrong with Carolina colors. And here's one that not a lot of people are talking about, but one of my favorite Jordan 4s were the Toro Bravo 4s. And the Toro Bravo Jordan Spiz-like Low I thought was fantastic. Now, this is a shoe that you can still get today. It fits the mold of that Toro Bravo 4, and while it isn't that, it is still fire. And so I thought that was one of the best Jordans that nobody talked about. However, when we're going to get into what my favorite Air Jordan of the year was, it may shock some people, it may not. But it was the Jordan 1 Low OG, the Howard colorway. Now, it wasn't specifically made for Howard University, but certainly the color palette was giving you vibes of Howard University. That shoe was amazing. Red, white, and blue. The materials looked amazing. The cut was amazing. And honestly, I think that a low top is worthy of Sneaker of the Year in terms of Jordans. And so that was my favorite of the year. There were tons of Air Jordans that came out this year. There's no way I could name all of them. Those were some of the ones that caught my eye, and my favorite being the Howard Jordan 1 Low. Nike, again, had a really good year, and I think that both Nike and Jordan Brand really focused on retros a lot. There was a lot of shoes that came out that weren't retros, but I think some of the best shoes of the year were retros. And I want to shout out some of these shoes that were both retros and non. And so let's start with the Air Max 95 Toronto. This was a release that really went under the radar here in the United States, but shout out to my boys in Kicks We Trust out of Toronto and out of Canada. That shoe was fire, and they did an entire episode on that, so please go check them out if you haven't yet. There's a lot of history on the Toronto scene, and later in 2025, we're going to get into sneaker cities more in-depth than we did back in 2023, and Toronto is going to be on the list. That was a fire Air Max 95. Honestly, it might be one that I go back for in 2025. We'll see. I live in the DMV, as you know, and the DMV Foamposite, that shoe is synonymous with the District of Columbia and the DC area, and I thought the DMV Foamposite was great. Yes, it kind of went down a cliched road with cherry blossoms and so forth, but I think the execution of it was wonderful. Obviously, Wale is behind it, but that's not why it's fire. It's just fire because it represents the area I live in and was a fire execution. The Air Max 1 Chlorophyll, the Pata colorway. The Pata Air Max 1 Chlorophyll, that was another shoe, kind of like the reimagined black and red 4s that got a lot of heat because the materials weren't as good as they have been on previous releases. But I think it was a really nice shoe. It was very simple. And now, after the fact, I do kind of feel a little bit of regret not going for them. It's a shoe that I think could work most of the year, and I think that overall, the quality of it was still good, even though it doesn't match what happened in 2009. That was a great release, and I thought it was worth mentioning here. Another one that I didn't get, but I thought was great, was the Futura Dunk Low. Now, Futura has had a long-standing history of great dunk releases and collaborations, and this one was no different. It was very limited. Some people I know who have it, they absolutely love it, and when they wear them, they absolutely love it. It isn't a shoe that I'm going to go out for, but I certainly recognize the design behind it. I certainly recognize why people love it, and it is one of the best dunks of the year, worthy of this list. The last two. The first one is something that a lot of people aren't talking about, but I've talked about it a lot this year. The undefeated Terra Humera. And it doesn't have to be the colorway that I have, which is the white and the gray and the almost like tan baseball glove looking material. All of them are fire. The teal, the olive, the black, the one that I have, all of them are fire. Very underrated shoe, very underrated collaboration. And you're not seeing that talked about out in the space in terms of best collaborations of the year. I have that shoe, I've beaten it up, I've washed it, it still is in great shape. I wish I had more colorways of it. It was wonderful, and I think it really went under the radar in terms of not just collaborations, but also undefeated collaborations, because these days undefeated kind of goes under the radar still in terms of the culture because there are so many boutiques, so many collaborators, and a lot of them have sort of passed undefeated at this point. But if I'm going to point out the best Nike or my favorite Nike of the year, it is going to be biased to one that I copped and also one that I reviewed on the YouTube channel, and that is the Air Tech Challenge 2 Hot Lava. Technically, this would be considered a reimagined look at this shoe, but the whole thing was wonderful. It was my favorite cop of the year, period. And that's not a spoiler for the rest of the list, it just was. This shoe was executed to perfection. It was awesome. The cut was great. The colors were great. The patina on it was great. It looked amazing. I love this shoe, and that is my favorite Nike of the year. If we're talking about the rest of the culture, though, we have to talk about non-Nike models, and I think that that makes sense. Not just non-Nike models, but non-Nike colorways. And when I look at it, a lot of them are associated with some type of collaborator or some type of brand, and that wasn't necessarily on purpose. It's just because, again, when you talk about some of these lifestyle shoes or running shoes, it's very difficult to parse them out from just your general release running shoe because a lot of them look the same. And so, in my opinion, it was really difficult to do that, but I did my best here to point out some of the ones that I thought were pretty great. And we're going to start with another underrated boutique, and that is Bodega. Now, earlier this year, Bodega had the Saucony Grid Shadow 2 Jaunt Woven colorway. This one was talked about a lot at the time, but hasn't been talked about since, and it's one that I think is worthy of going back for. Bodega is very underrated and has had so many fire collaborations over the years, especially in the New Balance realm. I have a collaboration that I got at the New Balance outlet last year. Completely fire. Couldn't believe that it went under the radar. This one is one to go back and look at if you're into that sort of thing. Saucony has kind of been a little bit under the radar as well because I think they're up and coming with all the running shoes that are coming out, but this one was completely fire. A guy that I mentioned last year, J Tips, had another great release with his Saucony Pro Grid Omni 9, and it was just another flashy and great release. Now, J Tips also did really well with the release aspect of it, and I think that that was something that has been touted in award season this year. But this was a great shoe. It looked very similar in some aspects to the shoe that he came out with last year, but that's his aesthetic. He's going with it. It was all kind of a perfect storm into a great shoe. And so shout out to J Tips for continuing to be a part of this culture and to continue to ascend. Action Bronson is another guy now who has been ascending, so to speak, with New Balance, but he put his design elements on the 1906R, which was a new model this year. And I love the Medusa Azul colorway. Now, a lot of people are going for the Rosewater colorway because that's probably the one that came out first and is most flashy and probably looks similar to the J-Tips. And yes, the Medusa Azul is just a blue shoe, but I just think that it works better. And I think that it works better because blue is my favorite color. And if I'm going to buy a New Balance, I want to buy something that fits my aesthetic and things that I like. And that one kind of fits more in it. And again, this is subjective. This is not an objective list. And so Action Bronson really doesn't do it for me musically. A lot of his shoes don't do it for me. But this one I thought was worthy of the list because I think not only was it a new model, it was also a great addition to his already great line that he has put out. And so a lot of people liked it. That's the one that I like. And Bad Bunny is another guy who continues to impress in sneaker culture. This year, though, the Gazelle San Juan, the blue with the translucent outsole, is a great shoe. Now, Greg from Sneak Disc talks about this shoe a lot. He owns it. He says it's sneaker of the year. I think it's fire. It's not my favorite non-Nike of the year, but I do love it, and I think it's worthy of the inclusion here. Bad Bunny is kind of getting to Travis Scott levels where we're going to start forgetting about all these releases because there are so many of them. But every so often, we're going to get one that is super fire, and I really like that San Juan. But if I'm going to talk about my favorite non-Nike, it's actually a retro, technically. And it's the Kith A6 Gel Light 3 07 Sole, which was remastered. Now, again, this is a very simple shoe. White, red, blue. It's obviously paying homage to Seoul, Korea. And so this is a remastered version of it. But man, the materials still look good. The colors look good. It's a shoe that could work all the time. And I just love the history behind it. And so I think not only is it fire, but it has that history. And it's one that did sell out. But not a lot of people talked about it because I don't think that people really remembered as much about it in terms of history. And I don't think the marketing was as good for it. But that was my favorite non-Nike of the year. And let's talk best new model before we get to the worst shoes of the year. Now, new model's interesting because there really aren't that many new models that come out every single year. But this year, I thought we had enough that I could talk about it. And I want to start with one that a lot of people didn't like once they got the shoe, but I think it's worthy because it took a chance, and that is the Soleil Bembury Pollux Juniper, the Croc shoe. This thing is a boat, and I don't think that it would be wearable except maybe to like the grocery store or something like that, but it took a risk. And I think that that risk is important because I think there's not enough risks being taken, and I think that if you want to wear that shoe with an outfit out at different places that are not just the grocery store or some mundane place, you need to have guts to wear a shoe like that. And I think that Soleil Bembury had to have guts to design a shoe like that. And so I think it's worthy of one of the best new models this year. Obviously, Devin Booker is an NBA player that doesn't have a lot of personality outwardly, but the Book 1, I think, was a great basketball shoe, a great new model. There's been a lot of colorways, not that many great colorways that are going to be memorable, but I think that the shoe itself, the model itself, was actually great, and I think will stand the test of time. It looks like a comfortable Air Force One, and there's nothing wrong with that because the Air Force One has continued to be a part of the culture 40 years on now. I think the Book 1 will be that as well, and I really did like that. These days, the WNBA is having an ascension in the sporting realm, and Sabrina Ionescu is one of the reasons why. And her Sabrina 2, I thought was absolutely fire. The Sabrina 1 was fire. But the Sabrina 2, while technically not a new model because it's the second iteration of it, I still think it's worthy because it is a new iteration, and so I think that it's worthy here. A lot of great colorways. She looked great in it. It's a shoe I think that can transcend both men's and women's wear, and I think that in the future they might want to think about making these shoes unisex, but that was a really great one. One that I did an episode on, the Jordan 4 RM. Now, technically, that is not a new model because the Jordan 4 is not a new model, but I think the Jordan 4 RM is considered a new model because it's a remix of the Jordan 4. It really doesn't look anything like the Jordan 4. It looks like a biking shoe or skating shoe, a lifestyle shoe. And the original Nigel colorway, which was that green colorway, everybody loved that. A lot of people haven't liked anything that came out since. But honestly, I think that it's a great general release shoe going forward. I do think they missed an opportunity in not getting into the history of it, but that's the ship has sailed at this point. But I think now, looking at it and how many colorways that have come out, there are a lot of possibilities for it. And I do think that it will stand the test of time. And we'll be talking about it 5, 6, 7 years down the road because I think there is a lot of potential there. And I think if they go into the history of it, they can actually really cement it as a part of the culture going forward. But Nigel's take on it, amazing. And honestly, I think that it's something that will stand the test of time. We just have to wait it out. But I think if we're talking best new model of the year, the only one that I can think of that I think transcends everything is the Anthony Edwards one, or the AE1. This is a basketball shoe that people were reminded that they could wear with jeans, which I think is an important thing because while we're wearing old Jordans, which technically are basketball shoes, I don't think that people are looking at KDs, new LeBrons, even the Sabrinas that we talked about. People are not wearing those with a fit. But people were starting to put this with a fit in the AE1, which was coupled with Anthony Edwards having a transcendent season, not just on the basketball court, but his personality as well. And there's a lot of potential with Adidas basketball and a lot of potential with the Anthony Edwards line. And I think a lot of people are waiting on bated breath to see how are they going to follow it up. But the AE1 took the culture by storm, and I think it was worthy of being the best new model of the year. So, we've talked about all the best, or I've talked about all of the best, but here's the thing. Not every year do we get all fire shoes, and sometimes these companies, they put out stinkers, in my opinion. And this year, there were quite a few of them, so I want to talk about some of those. Now, I'm going to start with the X-Ray Kobe 5s. I know a lot of people are going to say, oh my God, how could you say that? It just wasn't for me. And I think that it was a little bit too cheesy for the Kobe line, which has been elevated not just since his death, but I think in general, there's a lot of reverence for the Kobe line. And I just didn't feel that shoe. I understand the theme behind it. I understand that people like it. Just wasn't for me, and it just felt a little bit too cheesy. This one, people are going to have an opinion on because a lot of people felt like it was the best dunk of the year or one of the best SB dunks of the years, and that was the Verdi SB Dunk Low Visti. The one that kind of looked like a colorful bear or something. I mean, we've kind of done that with the Grateful Deads. This one just looked, I don't know. I could not wear this shoe. It looked like a kid's shoe, and if you have it, I assume it's part of a collection. Hate on me if you want. Just didn't do it for me. And when it comes to Nike Dunk Low, especially the SBs, I have a very high standard for what I want out of those designs. And that one did take some risks, but it just didn't feel worthy of, I don't know, it just didn't do it for me, that's all. And so that one is on my list. Nike tried to innovate like they do every year on Air Max Day with another Air Max model. And they came out with the Air Max DN. And really, it wasn't new. It was a lot of recycled technology. And it's lazy. That's lazy on Nike's part. And so the Air Max DN gets a nod from me because boy, oh boy, I just could not do that. Jordan Brand also tried to take some risks this year, and they came out with the Jordan 4 Net. Just stop. We need to just stop. It's terrible. I've seen a lot of videos of people trying to cut the netting off of it, and that's fine, but it's just a bridge too far. Leave the Jordan 4 where it is. Try to do innovation differently. They came out with the Jordan 4 RM. That's an attempt at innovation. That's a good attempt at innovation. The Jordan 4 net, it sucks. It's absolutely terrible, and I don't want to see any more colorways of it, and I hope they don't try and do this with future silhouettes because it's just not going to work, and they're going to waste a lot of money because even at outlet prices, I'm not buying that. But if I had to point out my least favorite shoe of the year, I already talked about the 1906 being a model that's up there. Man, the New Balance 1906 loafer, what are we doing? I just don't understand what that is all about. And if you really need to wear sneakers that bad that you need to have them in a loafer version, I don't know. Where are you wearing that? Who is the audience for that? It's just terrible. It's the worst shoe of the year. I hope they don't make any more of them. And my God, it's just awful. So what was your sneaker of the year? I'd love to know. You can get in touch with me on Instagram at FireFootwearPod is the handle. Would love to add new people to the group chat that we have there in the new year. So hit me up there. I'd love to add you. Find the YouTube channel, Fire Footwear Sneakers Talk with Matt Frates is what you'd search. I have a lot of ideas for 2025. I'm starting to do some sneaker reviews, some different things. Definitely check me out there. You can find me on TikTok at Fire Footwear Pod is the handle. And of course, you can call the Fire Footwear hotline. Hopefully I have more people who call in the new year. I'd love to share some stories. Area code 202-643 9170 is the number. Don't forget the +1 country code for anybody who is outside of the United States. Folks, I hope you had a great holiday. I hope that you have a great new year. It has been wonderful bringing content to you this year. This month it has been a little bit slow and over the last couple months with family things, but just know that I am geared up for a great and fruitful 2025. I have a lot of ideas and I hope to have more voices on this podcast and on the YouTube channel. I hope this finds you well, fam. I hope this finds you safe, and I'll see you next year. This is Fire Footwear. The opinions and viewpoints expressed on Fire Footwear are those of Matt Frates and his guests, and not necessarily those of the Matty Ice Media Network. Fire Footwear is exclusively owned by Matt Frates and is brought to you by the Matty Ice Media Network.